All right, welcome to How to Draw Dragons with the Dragon Story. So in this video, we will cover the next phase of my drawing process, which is the line work. Once again, you're probably familiar with my supplies, iPad Pro. I'm using Procreate, Apple Pencil, and my glove. Hey, that worked, but it doesn't draw. So that helps protect my hand because I'm an artist that rests his hand on the canvas. And so in phase 2, we will start covering the line work drawing. And so for that, I create a second layer and I drop down the opacity really thin. So I can still see the shape, but I can really get in here and start creating the line work. Now, one of the things that I've learned, well, based on my process, is if I get my line too thick, I always end up going back and correcting it. And so I end up creating a pretty thin line to create the line work. And this can kind of get tedious. Well, each phase gets more and more tedious. And so basically, I'll just go in and create the line work based on the shape that I've already defined. And it's in this phase that you'll really start making sure you map out the details, the specifics. You'll discover some errors. See, I'm already noticing like a difference in my line quality. And so I kind of want to be careful. I want to keep my initial line quality pretty similar. I mean, unless I specifically want it different, but. Oops, I accidentally did an undo, which happens all the time. But see, and here I look at this and I'm like, that horn's kind of angled at a different spot. I want it to flow a little bit better. There we go. So one of the things that I do with my dragons is a lot of them usually have defined lips. I mean, I know they're kind of reptilian-like creatures, but because the dragons in my world talk and have speech, they usually have lips to facilitate the talking. And a lot of what I do has been based on what I've learned in other drawings. Like if you spend a lot of time drawing other animals, then when you go to create a dragon eye, you can implement the things that you've learned from drawing the animals into the dragon. But see, I almost think that eye is out of place. So then I come in here. And a lot of it's because you want to think in 3D space. You know, if the bridge of his snout swoops down, that means, you know, the eyebrows are kind of coming up here. And so you want to make sure that all lines up. Oops. And I just like my lines to flow very organically. Kind of create the jaw. Usually there's pretty large jaw muscles. And it always helps studying muscle structures and how muscles are formed. Because, I mean, muscles, they have a shape, but they end up wrapping around, sort of spiraling spiraling around almost. And so a lot of muscle structures are, they wrap around the form of the creature, individual, or whoever you're drawing, or whatever you're drawing, I guess. You also want to think of your horns in 3D space, meaning, you know, they're not always perfect, like tubes. I mean, that could be part of the design, but I tend to find it more interesting to give a little bit of dimension to the horn. You know, maybe there's like a flat edge or something. See, that line's too dark. See, I don't like the thickness of that horn because it almost feels thicker than that horn. And typically in nature, there's sort of a gradation. Is that a word? I'm just toning down the opacity of the layer so I can see my line work a little bit better. There's his neck. That loose skin, loose folds of skin. In contrast to the other side of his neck, which is full of muscles. Maybe I should get these drawn in too. And every little thing you do creates the personality of your dragon. Like the decision of, okay, well, should these scales be pointed or should they be rounded? You know, because rounded would create a different feel or a different personality to your dragon. But if you're thinking, oh, I'll give him the adds a certain personality to him. You know, maybe he's more of a energetic or volatile personality, or he's a very sharp person. Or dragon, I guess I should say. And I'm intentionally kind of keeping it loose because the next phase, which I would probably call refinement, that's when I really tighten up the line work. The other thing I want to be careful with is it's really awkward if, you know, a line comes, like it connects to those 2 points. Because then you start getting like this weird visual pattern and it draws your eye to where those lines are cross connecting. And so I often want to specifically plan the layout of the scales so I don't get some of those weird shapes, those weird connections. The scales are kind of connecting into the neck. So we'll want to make sure we show that. Let's see. And then I like putting these little smaller scales. Creates interest. to help build the reality, let's go back in and fix the way it connects. Let's see how it's looking. Okay. And a lot of times I notice with reptiles, there's usually like a variation of scales. Like they always, you know, if there's long scales, there's usually shorter ones next to it. And so I like just adding some of those things in. Well, and actually looking at this now, I mean, this dragon really has sharper scales up here. So let's make sure that they fit that same aesthetic underneath. Make them a little bit sharper. And then they just kind of eventually blend in. But then it makes sense because then these scales, right, can now form scales in the front. Which is kind of a cool look. And be very aware of how the neck and jaw connect and how the skin kind of folds around that. It's always helpful to study muscle structures in animals. Just because things with long necks, there's still a muscle that connects up here, and usually it connects down to the collarbone. And so that's a lot of what forms the neck. But again, it starts up here, but then crosses over to the front. And so that helps determine a lot of these lines, which, I mean, are more noticeable once I get into the shading part. But they're things you want to be aware of. And so what's nice is this distance, oops, let me do this, is quite even all throughout. And that helps create a more realistic, believable dragon. So I'm going to do those arrows. I'm going to keep this line here because that really illustrates where that muscle is and how it connects. But I'll probably go back in and erase over it. So then what I do is I drop the rough sketch out, and I take a look at this and make sure it is exactly how I want it. And sometimes, because some of the lines are kind of thin, you can just duplicate your layer. I'm not going to do that yet, but because another thing you can do is if you flip your image in reverse, you can also see some of the issues, things you might be missing or things that need improving. And so it's always good to flip your image back and forth. Sometimes even flipping it upside down. Like you just want to look at it from every angle. I mean, when I first was learning to draw, my art teacher told me to look at your work in the mirror because you see it from a different angle. And it's really funny how when you just draw, a lot of times things can seem warped until you see it from different ways. And so this is kind of the phase 2 where I'm blocking out the line work. Making sure it's the exact shape I want, making sure it's got the details, double checking proportions and anatomy structures and all that stuff. And so that's kind of the end of phase 2. Phase 3, or I guess the next phase, is a refined version of this line work, where we go back through and just double check everything and add in some more details. And so I'll cover those steps in the next phase.